I am super delighted to be here with Nundale to talk about his brand new EP, Nothing Nothing, which came out recently. And it's a stunning 6-track EP, which in my ears is something that is overflowing with a barely restrained sort of tension, an emotional rawness, and it's something that I've been listening to a lot in the last few days, and it feels like a release which has an awful lot to say, and I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to hear what you have to say about it, now that we're getting a chance to chat about it in person.
A 6-track EP means a great deal to me, because it takes me an awful long time, not just to have the material, but to also be okay releasing it. And I hate to say the expression this EP means a lot to me, and it's very personal, because my impression is if something is worth doing it's worth doing it right, and it should be, especially in art and music very specifically, it should really be personal, or it shouldn't be there at all. But this one is very, very meaningful to me for a lot of reasons. First, the obvious one, it's my return to slower tempo. So I'm almost not quite half-timed my former tempo, which was like in the 135, 140 for a while, back to a very comfortable 75 to 90. That is one major obvious change that happened, because that also allowed me to explore time in a new way and really let those melodic ideas that I have kind of simmer and expand much more than I felt they could when I was still embracing, speedier compositions.
Whilst I listened to these tracks over and over, it was something that there was a story that I could feel was there, and quite specifically, something that occurred to me was playing God on that track. It felt to me like there was a moral being told here, and that moral is hinted at through a melodic tone at the beginning of the track, and then it sort of resolves itself again at the end of the track. And that was something that kind of I felt quite strongly when I listened to that track, and I think maybe it's a good time for us to actually give a listen to that track here, so everyone can kind of get a sense of what's going on and what we're talking about, and maybe we'll have a listen to that and then come back in a few minutes. Okay, so that was super. I absolutely love that piece, and and it feels like I'd like to say that one thing that I've kind of felt from listening to these tracks is that and I said that there was kind of a rawness to the pieces, but at the same time, I feel like it's the best production value of your work that I've heard to date, and it's something that I've heard evolving since your previous releases through the recent compilation tracks. I could hear that production value improving all the time, but also this sense that you were finding your voice in a stronger way. And like I've heard stuff from your early days, your pre-Errorgrid stuff, and your EP, your first EP with Errorgrid, the Staircases A, I think it was called. And those releases had a kind of there was definitely a strong nod to sort of the IDM kind of 90s sort of vibe about them. And it feels like now with this release that and through the Darker Sounds of the Present Future compilation tracks, that you were kind of finding your way to a new voice. And do you think that that's something that you have felt that you found a voice more uniquely now?
I think as an artist, the best thing we can hope for is to find our voice, so that we can truthfully express that which we have to say. And it is very true. I subscribe to that sentiment in that it almost feels like up until my contributions to A Darker Sound for Present Future compilations, I was kind of seeking. I was trying out. I was easily distracted. But I feel like there has always been at the very core, there has always been this essence that drew me towards certain melodic progressions that have a tendency of falling from major to minor chords. My distraction up until recently was also due to the availability of tools that I had. I dove deep into the modular community, and those tools also kind of lent themselves towards more random compositions, so far that it kind of took over the compositions that I had in mind, because you wanted to explore randomness when you have those kind of tools. But it also frustrated me because I felt like that which I have to say cannot really be said with random voltages. It can, in terms of like if it's the basic fundamental thing of your music, random voltages for melodic progressions and rhythms takes music very quickly into a random corner, which is great if that is where you want to explore. Most of the tracks I was able in the mixing project to cook down to 12 to 15 tracks, which before was unheard of. I ended up with at least twice as many, with little glitches and little plops and little blurs and now it was basically really just focusing on the drum section, on the massive low end section, and on a kind of mid end section for the melodic content, and bringing those three guys together. And that is kind of like the rawness that you find now, which I just had a permanent smile on my face when because I felt, I'm in so much more control now. It's so much easier for me to express something that I feel when I have the ability to guide these three sections and bring them together, and things just fell into place. But I think the most important aspect that I have left out so far is I have embraced the concept of negative space. So rather than working in an additive fashion where you keep adding tracks, in which is something I did with my modular setup, it was quite big up until recently. I kept adding and I filled out space, but now I'm really carving out. So nothing is technically the result of removing things, of removing yourself, removing ballast, removing, carving out clutter, and that helped me to bring out the individual sounds much more. Not just because it's the technical principle of using an EQ. It's also now when a certain sound is playing, all other sounds have to be quiet. And when this section is playing, this section has to tone down and wait its turn.
Well, no, it's really intriguing to hear you say all of that. And, you know, it's something that, like, I know we talked about you finding your voice, but also then, you know, conversely about the influences and how they affect things. And you know, I'd spoken of an IDM sound in your earlier pieces, and certainly they brought to mind things like Gescom, but in listening to this release, but I did bring to mind Boards of Canada. There was a certain tonal quality throughout this, which I found quite intriguing, which, you know, was part of that kind of raw sound, but it's a raw sound, but it's well produced rawness, you know. So I find that fascinating to hear you talk about that. But do you also find that there's been an influence on your approach to things by being a member of the Errorgrid family? Yeah. Because, you know, I felt there was certain sonic qualities in this release that kind of made me think of a link to, you know, and not like a direct sonic one-to-one link, you know, that this sound is something that somebody else uses, but just that sort of that feel, that kind of vibe, that idea that some of the other Errorgrid members have brought out in their music.
I pick from everyone. I listen to everything we produce and we put out all the time, and there's not one release that we've you know, put out since our inception that is not a reference for me for something that it did especially well and that really resonates with me. And I always go back to almost all of the releases and listen to how it makes me feel, how it was done, what it sounds like, and try to kind of like bring that energy in my own way into my body of work, and even have conversations. I have lengthy conversations with the guys from Broken Circuit about, you know, production techniques. I have lengthy conversations about, you know, the essence of production and making music with Jono. I have super long, beautiful conversations with Sombra Lux about, you know, what holds all these pieces together. I have conversations with Snakes of Russia about production techniques. I have conversations with you know, about also kind of like the underpinnings of everything. So yeah, we have a unique voice that is just for us to have, but how that, you know, the how, not the why, but the how things are being expressed is exposed to the outside, is exposed to our immediate circle of influence. And I think that's correct. It's right. We're not supposed to reinvent the wheel. That's stupid to reinvent the wheel by yourself. The wheel has been invented. You know, now you take that wheel and you make it better for yourself.
And then just to, you know, to not go on too long, I suppose, but I did want to ask about the, you know, because design is, you know, something that I have always felt is a very strong part of the Errorgrid approach, that there's a consistent kind of feel to a lot of the design work that comes out of the collective. And I found the new cover for Nothing Nothing to be very intriguing. There was a sort of haunting, almost melancholic sort of feel to it, like being lost at sea or losing one's memory. And I guess this plays into this kind of nothing, coming from nothing and going into nothing. But maybe you could tell a little bit of how that artwork developed and where that came from.
Well, your interpretation just gave me the chills. You know, it's a frame grab from a Super 8 movie that I shot about well over 20 years ago. and it was intended as an MTV station ID animation. I think it was used for a little bit, not this specific shot, but some of the shots that we shot that one day. Then I discovered this field there was nothing in there except for power lines running through it, and that was somewhere in the midst of nowhere in Switzerland. And I've always been fascinated by imagery that capture the two opposing natures that live around us, which is the human nature and the artificial nature that we create as human beings. And for me, pylons, so the carriers of electricity and light and life into urban environments, have always had this emblematic, almost monolithic, symbolic meaning. They look like human beings, kind of like, they have a trunk and they have arms, and they look like artificial trees, so they mimic life, but they're really just about the artificial side of life. And within this setting, you have this kind of lost creature that represents a humanity that has lost its ways, but is still so connected to the artificial reality it's created, and within it everything is kind of a blur. So it's really the suspension. You're suspended in thin air in a vacuum that you created yourself, which was what struck me when I saw this frame grab a couple of weeks ago in the search of an idea for the cover. And it instantly spoke to me because there's a personal attachment to it, but it's also a washed out memory for me. It is washed out in the visual sense. It is washed out in the symbolic sense. So when I reached out to my friend who's a graphic designer I just gave him the frame grab and gave him the briefing of like what I felt, and he adjusted it. And when it came back in the frame, I was just blown away. It just added a layer to what was already there for me in the tracks. And I'm very hopeful that people can look at it while listening and just feel a little bit of that positive, hopeful desperation, I call it, where you can just relinquish control and give into the nothingness and accept how you feel and accept that this is part of, being human.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about this. It's been really illuminating, and I feel really happy because you kind of have confirmed a lot of the thoughts and feelings that I had whilst I was listening through to it. Make sure everyone to check out Nothing Nothing. It'll be on Bandcamp and all the usual streaming services. You can find it there. Just search for NUNDALE or check out the links at the bottom of this video, and you'll also be playing, I believe, in November as part of a Errorgrid showcase. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I heard.
You could just give a quick little spin on that for us before.
So first off, I heard that you're not going to be playing. So how dare you?
It's a long way to come. It's a long way to come.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Soon. Someday soon.
Berlin to Los Angeles. Yeah, so we have our very first show, which I like to call a live showcase in a very intimate setting. It's going to be just a couple dozen people at the Vintage Synthesizer Museum in Los Angeles, in Highland Park, more specifically, on November 19th. And it's gonna feature 6 of our artists playing live sets, and I think we can expect it to be a very broad setup. We will also unveil our brand new compilation called Opposing Forces at that event, and anyone who buys a ticket gets a free download of the compilation that will be unveiled that day. And we're also going to have merchandise there, which we've never had before. And we'll also have your CD there, of course, right? Because this was the first physical release in Errorgrid ever. And it's going to be great. So we're going to post a link underneath here where you can, get more information and buy your tickets. And it's only pre-sale, so there's no sales at the door to be let in, because it's very restricted, very limited, very personal, and we want to keep it that way. Yeah, I think I said everything, right? Did I miss anything?
I think so.
Well, it's going to be
No.
Malarkey, Modect, Snakes of Russia, Sombra Lux, John O'Wells, and myself on stage in this beautiful setting with the Vintage Synthesizer Museum. So yeah, make sure you're there, because there's only one first show, and that's going to be it.
I certainly wish I was able to be there, and I hope you guys have a great show, and I can't wait to hear some recordings and see some pictures. So yeah, have a great time at that, and best of luck with this release. I hope that it gets lots of people who find your music and discover the story that you want to tell. Yeah. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Alex.